Good day, everyone. We'll begin our discussion on the introduction to globalization. It is very important to begin our discussion with on the contemporary world as to defining globalization for you to get a good grasp of the totality of what the contemporary world is all about. So, basically, our discussion on the contemporary world will boil down to the idea of globalization. So, in the first place of before providing you with all other concepts about the contemporary world, it would be fitting and appropriate first to introduce to you what globalization is. So let's begin.
So before we will go on with the flesh of this discussion, I would like to ask some preliminary questions. Say preliminary questions. These are questions that I will be asking, and you try to answer it by yourself, by your own. Just think of your answer, and then let's go on with the discussion. So, first question is, when you hear the word globalization, what comes first in your mind? So, I know that globalization could be an old word for you. For others, it might be a new word. But when you hear this word, what comes first in your mind? What are you thinking in the first place? Are you thinking of economy? Are you thinking of technology? Are you thinking of finances? Are you thinking of health? Are you thinking of culture? Or whatever it is that you are thinking when you hear the word globalization. Then, have you had a global experience? Have you tried a global experience? Have you been into a global experience? So, how old are you now? For that years of staying in this world, can you tell an experience that you could consider as a global experience? Then, in your own perspective, if you will define globalization in your own perspective, how will you define it? So I know you have your answers for these questions, and you try to check later on when we talk about with our discussions if your answers are closely related or maybe connected and um, similar with our points of discussion today. So when we define globalization, do you think globalization is defined as an economic phenomenon? Do you think it's an economic phenomenon? How about a social phenomenon? Is it a social phenomenon or a cultural phenomenon? Do you think globalization is a cultural phenomenon? So, in order for us to have a working definition of globalization, we will define globalization as the movement towards the expansion of economic and social ties between countries through the spread of corporate institutions and the capitalist philosophy that leads to the shrinking of the world in economic terms. So here, we are not just talking about economy, we are not just talking about society, but we are also talking about culture. So when we say globalization, it could be defined as movement in the expansion of economic and social ties between countries. So here, this will not only include one country but between countries because from the word itself, globalization, global. So when we confine to one country, then we could not call it globalization. So here, the spread between countries, and there is that spread of corporate institutions and the capitalist philosophy leading to the shrinking of the world in economic terms. So when we say shrinking of the world in economic terms, how will you elaborate this phrase? Shrinking of the world in economic terms. That means that if we think that the world is so big, if we think that the world is so huge that we could not, it is impossible for us to connect with other people. It's impossible for us to do business with people from the other countries, from the different side of the world, then because of globalization, the world seems to be shrinking. Meaning to say, it's just easy for us to connect with people. It's just easy for us to do business with people in just a click of our finger, or in just a matter of seconds, minutes, and hours. We don't need to travel. We don't need to use the classical or old ways of communication, because everything, and mostly everything, is provided to us and available so that we could connect with people, right? So it seems that the world is shrinking. It seems that if before we just thought that the world is so big, now we could only think that, I think it's a small world after all, because we could easily connect with people, we could easily communicate, we could easily do business and interact with others. So globalization per se could involve a lot of things, and with this diagram, this figure, we could tell that it involves all these things. So if the center is globalization, then including this, involving globalization, are the following. So we have accountability, terrorism, the shrinking of the world, technology, the free trade, culture, capitalism, monopoly of power, environment, poverty, growth, exploitation, brands, outsourcing, trade versus aid, recognition, communication, equality or inequality, and also the integration of economies. So by this diagram, we could tell that globalization is not a simple process. Globalization is truly a complex one. So, because it does not only involve a single thing, it does not only involve a single concept, one concept, but there are a lot of concepts connected and involving globalization. So now we will go to just not everything in this diagram, but just some of the important and vital components of globalization. And now let's have integration of economies. So here, countries around the world, the economy of the countries around the world is being connected with each other. So there is that, when we say integration of economies, there is the presence of increased reliance of economies on each other. So one country could depend on the economy of other country, and vice versa, or one or more countries. So it seems that we do business with other country because we have profit, we have revenues. So countries tend to rely on each other in terms of economies. The opportunities to be able to buy and sell in any country in the world. So, because of the integration of economies, we do not only rely with each other, but we also have the opportunities to be able to buy, to be able to sell in any country of the world. So that's why we have this idea of importation and exportation of products, because, and at present, we are not just only doing this through old or traditional means, but by merely, for example, installing an application like Lazada or Shopee or whatever online shop app that we have, we could easily buy and sell any products around the world, available around the world, because there is already that integration of economies brought by globalization. Then the opportunities for labor and capital to locate anywhere in the world. So if before we could think that it's very difficult to find ways to put up a business, this time we also have a lot of opportunities. For example, for labor, we could work. We could find work in the internet, easily in the internet. So if there is that integration of economies, if there is the opportunities to be able to buy and sell in any country of the world, then the labor, the necessity for employees, the employment opportunities are also available in the labor market, and capital also to source out funds are available around the world. Then, because of these things, there is the growth of global markets in finance. So, global market is gradually increasing. It expands over time because of these changes, because of this development in the integration of economies. So, aside from that, we could also tell that stock markets are now accessible from anywhere in the world because there are a lot of stock markets sites that where we could finance or could buy stocks in the stock market, and these are available anywhere in the world. Now, what made integration of economies possible? So actually, there are a lot of factors why integration of economies become possible. So first is, of course, undeniably, technology. Now, communication networks, internet access, the growth of economic cooperation, like trading blocks, for example, in Europe, the Europe nations, they have European Union. In Southeast Asia, we have the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or the ASEAN. Then, due to collapse of communism also, integration of economies becomes stronger. Then, by that, because of the movement to free trade, anyone and anywhere from the world could do business, could interact with people. Then that's integration of economies.
However, everyone should take note that when we talk about globalization, it does not only evolve into the integration of economies, because globalization is also a social phenomenon and even a cultural phenomenon. That's why we could define globalization as interaction of economic, social, and cultural phenomena. That's why, in other words, you also define globalization as the movement towards the expansion of economic and social ties between countries through the spread of corporate institutions and the capitalist philosophy that leads to the shrinking of the world in economic terms.